I have the distinct honor of welcoming our final speaker, my friend and colleague, Dr. Christina Maslach. I will have her begin her presentation after I introduce her to you. So Dr. Maslach is one of the founders of the field of burnout research, with the most prominent scale measuring this phenomenon named after her. Her work led to the WHO to recognize burnout as an occupational phenomenon in the International Classification of Diseases in the 11th revision. While on the faculty at UC Berkeley, she also served in several important administrative roles, including chair of the Academic Senate and vice provost. Dr. Maslach received her undergraduate degree in social relations from Harvard Radcliffe and her doctorate in psychology from Stanford University. Dr. Maslach.
Okay, well, good to see you, Chris, and I'm glad to be invited to be able to share what we think we understand and know about burnout these days. And there's a lot more talk about burnout these days than there used to be, but it's not a new phenomenon. It's been around for a while, and so I hope I can share with you some of what we understand about it. First, no disclosures. But I want to start, as Chris did, with the World Health Organization, which had made an important statement about COVID in 2019, but it also made an important statement a year ago exactly, in May of 2019, about job burnout. And it said that burnout is a syndrome conceptualized resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And before I go on with the rest of the statement, let me just point out two important aspects of that first sentence. One, chronic workplace stress. Burnout is a response to high-frequency stressors. They are there most of the time, if not all of the time. They are the pebbles in your shoe you can't get rid of. They're just there a lot. And this is important because in contrast to more acute stressors, which happen occasionally or once in a while or something like that, this is high-frequency chronic. And that means that it is harder for good recovery from chronic. The human stress response is supposed to galvanize you into some sort of action. It's a normal response. It's a good thing that we have that to respond to challenges and threats. But then as we deal with it, we then recover, rest, come back, ready to start again. And when it's chronic, that gets harder to do.
Dr. Maslach, I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment. Do you mind moving your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth? You're a little bit quiet.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Ah, so much better. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to repeat any of that or not? No. Okay, I'll keep going. So what I was saying is there are two important points here. One, chronic workplace stress, high-frequency stressors in the workplace. The second important point is that says not been successfully managed. That's an optimistic statement. There's a hint of optimism there because it's saying it could be. We could do better. It could be that the stressors wouldn't happen as often or with such intensity, or they could be replaced or removed or something like that. Now, WHO didn't say who should manage it. The individual worker, the supervisor, the colleagues, the organization, professional groups. Basically, the answer is all of the above. It can be managed in multiple ways by multiple, participants. And it was saying it's open to all. It's not designating a particular person. So the next point is, how are we defining burnout? And this is what we have learned over the research, that it's not just the individual stress response. It includes that, and that is exhaustion, energy depletion. You just have nothing left after you're responding to this. But burnout is more than just, feeling stress and responding to these stressors. It's what happens to people as a result of this in the workplace. One is that they develop a very hostile, negative cynicism about the job. the place, what I'm doing, these people, they don't know how to run it. It's, this is lousy. You really get upset about what's going on there and really turning off on the job. To quote a country western song, take this job and shove it, is really kind of the response that begins to happen. And for me, that's really more the hallmark of burnout than the exhaustion from the stress response, because the cynicism means that people start working differently. They start doing the bare minimum rather than trying to do their very best. So the quality of their performance, whether it's well done, whether there are errors, whether they have absent from work, whether it affects other people negatively, all of that kind of thing is an important aspect of what happens with burnout. And the third component is, not only do you begin to feel negative about the job and the work, you're beginning to feel negative about yourself in terms of your own effectiveness in this professional, whatever job you're in. What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this better? Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe this isn't the place for me. I'm not proud of some of the stuff I've done. All of this kind of thing that really begins to feel negatively about oneself. So all three, that trifecta of exhaustion, cynicism, and ineffectiveness, is what constitutes burnout. World Health Organization made it clear that it's an occupational phenomenon which can lead to health consequences. This is true of when we think of just the basic stress response. We've known for decades that it can lead to things like cardiovascular problems, musculoskeletal problems. Over time, it might lead to depression or anxiety. But it's not a medical condition. Now, even though WHO said that, and they're the World Health Organization, they said, no, it is not a disease. It is not some sort of illness, that kind of thing, even though everybody assumed that if World Health said that, it must be a disease. And I want to show you as we go through, the problem is that that's the dominant response even now, that people think it is an individual weakness, failing, disease, mental illness, all of this kind of thing. And although it can be linked, it's linked to other things as well, but in of itself, it is not a disease. And that's a big challenge. It's also a misconception that we have a lot going on today. So I get asked this question all the time. So what's the matter? Is it the person or is it the situation? And it's actually, this is part of the misperception. It's usually labeled as a problem of individuals. Who's burning out? What's wrong with them? What are we going to do to help them, to cure them? People use medical terminology. What are the symptoms of burnout? How do we diagnose it? They send people off to doctors to get, some sort of treatment. And I just want to quote this from doctors, actually, who have done a lot of research in the Mayo Clinic on physician burnout, saying that even, the fact that almost 1 in 2 physicians has symptoms, of course they're still doing that term there, of burnout, implies that the origins are rooted in the environment and the care delivery system. It's not about the individuals per se. And that kind of position, which is goes along with what we've discovered in our research, has been a hard message for people to grasp. They're still thinking of it as a disease. So rather than either or, the question should really be framed as a both and. It's both the person and the situation. People bring whatever they bring in terms of their best selves or not, to the workplace. But the workplace conditions are another factor of this chronic job stressors that have not been successfully managed that cause burnout. So we need to rethink the problem, and so not to look at, well, who is burning out, but the question more is, why are they experiencing this kind of thing or other sorts of negative responses to the job stressors. So we've known this for several decades now, and people around the world have been doing research on these kinds of issues, and then along came the pandemic, and people have said, oh my gosh, did that bring on burnout? Well, no, burnout was already there. Did it make it worse in some places for people? Did it affect the job environment? What happened to that, relationship between the workers and the workplace? And as you probably know, it made it worse in many ways, but in some cases not. So, what did it do to exhaustion, the basic stress response? Well, in a lot of places, healthcare, teaching, shopping, delivery, and all this kind of thing, what it means is they were under persistent peak demand. I mean, there's no letdown. It's overwhelming. It's overload. There's no time to break. There's no time, to be free of this in some way. Uncertainty, certainly early on, it wasn't clear, you know, am I going to get infected or not? When am I more at risk? What do I need to do? Am I going to bring this home to my family? But there were also recovery disruptions. So it's one thing to get exhausted working, all this, uncertainty hazards going on around you. But then it made it difficult to sleep, or you didn't get enough time to sleep. The kind of things you do to relax and feel better and get healthier were gone. Fitness centers and gyms were closed. So were films. So were the local restaurants and the bars and whatever. So there was not the kind of thing that people might do to actually recover from stress. So that certainly racked up the exhaustion, the stress response. But now, what was happening with cynicism? Well, that was beginning to also go up, largely because people were feeling, I'm more at risk than I ever was. I thought I was safe when I went into the workplace. Now I'm not. The workplace has changed. I'm working in a different place, or I'm having to work at home, which is not normal and usual, and I have to get used to that. And I'm still feeling exposed. But there was an important part in many of these occupations in healthcare, for sure, was this sense of feeling betrayed. There was not preparation for this. There was not protective equipment. I mean, people in the beginning were wearing, garbage bags and stuff because there wasn't something that was keeping them safe on the job. And so that betrayal, in that sense, think of being a teacher in elementary school and being suddenly dumped into the deep end of the pool without any preparation about how you're going to do a good job teaching children remotely. All of the difficulties that were involved in there. So it happened in a lot of places. And then feeling alone. Social distancing was the norm. We can't have much contact. We can't be close. We can't, so all of this risk, betrayal, feeling alone certainly contributed to an uptick in the cynicism of burnout. And then finally, when we talk about inefficacy, in terms of your profession, a lot of cases people had to work and keep working, but outside their expertise. You got moved into different groups. You were asked to do new things that you hadn't done before. And this just kind of, am I really good at this? Do I know what I'm doing? The technology could be, allow you to work remotely, but sometimes it didn't work, or it worked badly, or it was unreliable. Again, losing any positive value of personal contact, although some people said it allowed me to be away from the awful part of personal contact, the bullying, the harassment and whatever. So, there were different points of view on that. And certainly early on, and this was true of a lot of the more first responder professions, there wasn't much evidence-based protocols on what we should be doing. And people were getting COVID and getting really sick, long haul, dying from COVID. And it's kind of, no matter what you did, it wasn't necessarily stemming that tide. And that really eats away at your sense of, I know what I'm doing and I'm doing a good job here. So there was a lot that added to burnout at that time. So what was the ultimate impact, in some sense, of the pandemic, and that I want to sort of focus on, is that we became much, much, much more aware of workplaces can be really unhealthy places to be. So unhealthy that they told you to go home, go somewhere else, don't come, don't be here. And in some cases, when people had to stay on the job, whether it was in hospitals or meatpacking plants, the risk and the danger was really, upped. It was an unhealthy place. You were working too close. Think of all the offices, that have all these desks in open workplaces packed near each other. You were in long hours within that enclosed space, another risk factor. Didn't have protective equipment, hard to keep things clean and hand washed, etc. So there were a lot of things that happened as a result of the pandemic that made a lot of the workplaces unhealthy places to be. But guess what? Just like we've known we've known burnout for a while, we've known for a long time that workplaces were unhealthy even before then. Well, in what way? And it's a overall summary here. We've known, lots of people who have done research on this, that all kinds of job conditions are highly stressful, toxic in the sense that they have a negative impact on people, including high demands, insecurity, lack of control, work-family conflict, etc. And the data out there is showing that we have to do this in order to make the economic bottom line. The social, personal bottom line, it gets a negative hit. And the data are showing that people's health, their productivity, their ability to work well, is at more risk when you are working under these kinds of job conditions. And one of our colleagues, Jeff Pfeffer at Stanford Business School, wrote a book just before the pandemic, which is very instructive in terms of these points because he's pulling together all that data, Dying for a Paycheck, and how the way workplaces are being structured is actually costly to both people and to the economic bottom line. So, this is not a new problem, but the pandemic certainly, I think, has shown a new light on it and has led to some new understandings about it. So what should we do about it? Well, the predominant response is, oh my gosh, people are burning out. We've got to do something to help them or fix them, or maybe fire them if they can't deal with it. So the predominant response, certainly in the United States, but also in a lot of other places, is you're helping people cope with the stress response and the stressors that are causing it. Not the stressors, but their response. How do we get them to relax? How do we get them to be healthy? Do they need time off? Should they practice more mindfulness? All of these, there's a self-care industry out there that has lots and lots and lots and lots of suggestions and tools and practices and classes and all kinds of things to help people cope. And that's not a bad thing. I'm not opposed to that. But it's not the only thing. It's focusing on the people who are trying to cope, but it does not prevent any of this. And to do that, the research has been pointing to a different response. You fix the job, not just the person. You look at why the stress is occurring, and burnout is the response. Not just who, but why that's happening, and what do you need to do. And when the pandemic made more and more workplaces unhealthy, it was clear we're not going to go back. We have to move forward and think of a new normal, but we had to work differently. Some of it worked well, some of it was disastrous, and all in between. But we need to be a lot more innovative and creative and thinking about, how does work get done, where, and in what ways that are most healthy and supportive of the people doing it. And really what we need to do is focus more on the both and of a match, a better fit, a balance between the job and the person. So it's the individual and the surrounding situation as well. The analogy I want to use here is that burnout is not simply, or should not be viewed at all, actually, as a disease or a failing or a weakness of people. It is more like a signal, like the canary in the coal mine. And if you recall, canaries would be let down into the mine to see if you could breathe, if you could, or was the environment unsafe? Were the toxic fumes too much, for another living being like a miner to go in? So it was a warning sign. It's a signal that something is not working well. And the response, like in the coal mines, is, oh my gosh, the conditions are not great. Let's make it better and healthier so that it's okay and people can go down and do the work of mining. It was not on trying to make the canary more resilient and strong and a tough old bird who could take anything in that work environment. And so, as I look at the data and stuff, it says burnout is telling us, in a way, it's a signal that there's not some good, healthy things going on in these workplaces. And when we begin to see these problems, we need to find out why and what we can do about it to make that change. So, job person mismatch. What we have found, and there's a lot of research as I'm saying here with but we have found so far 6 areas in which that mismatch is a predictor of subsequent risk of burnout. And what are they? Well, the one that everybody thinks about is demand overload. It's a workload issue. And basically, the mismatch is that the demands are incredibly high and the resources to meet those demands are incredibly low. You don't have enough time, you don't have enough people, you don't have the right equipment, you don't have the information that you need, all of these kind of things which make it difficult, if not impossible, to actually meet those kind of workload demands. But it turns out in many cases that's not the big one, and sometimes it's not the major mismatch that's a problem. Often people are talking about an uncontrollable workload, that you don't have say, you don't have autonomy, discretion, choice to make a difference, to do it a little differently, to course correct, to innovate, even if you've been trained well to do this kind of work. So that lack of autonomy, that lack of control is another important area. And by the way, these are not independent areas of mismatch. They often can overlap or be, several at a time. Third area is insufficient reward, and that means any kind of positive feedback for doing a job well. And we think about salary, we think about benefits, and those obviously play a role. But we are also finding in the research that social recognition is an important reward, that somebody notices and pays attention to the fact that you did a good job, that you saved the day, that you went above and beyond, that you get a thanks, you get a pat on the back, you get a new opportunity maybe down the road, all of that kind of thing, rather than working in an environment where the best you can say about it is a good day. Well, nothing bad happened, so that's a good day. Not the presence of good, but the absence of any bad things. Breakdown of community. By this I mean the workplace community. These are your colleagues, the people you supervise, your bosses, vendors, whoever crosses your path on a somewhat regular basis. And we've been seeing a real uptick in problems with this mismatch in recent years, even before the pandemic, where there's a culture of fear. You don't dare say no when you're asked to do an extra job or come in on the weekend when you're supposed to be off. You don't speak up about having any doubts or problems or concerns because you'll be stigmatized, you'll be thrown under the bus, people will be bullying. This is where harassment is. This is where, really negative relationships between people. There's a lack of support. There's a lack of trust. You really don't know who to turn to if you need help. And this has been going up, as I said, quite significantly. And people talk about it as being socially toxic. I love my work. I think I do a good job, but I can't stand being in that office or that clinic, whatever, with everybody else. Fifth one is absence of fairness. It turns out that whatever the rules, whatever the policy, whatever the practice is, we want to be treated and have it applied fairly. It's a sign of how that we have respect, that we do things in the right way here. Where there's an absence of fairness, this is where there is discrimination. This is where there are glass ceilings. This is where people are cheating, lying, etc. to get ahead. This is where this drives cynicism in a big way. If people are feeling like no matter what we preach, we don't practice it. And this absence of fairness can be a biggie. And finally, the sixth area we've been finding is value and conflicts. So there's ethical dilemmas. You're being asked to do things that you know are wrong or go against your values. You're being caught having to do what they call moral injury in healthcare. compassion fatigue, all of these kind of things. This is about meaning. This is about purpose. Why am I in this job, and why am I working hard at it, and am I proud of what I'm doing, and feel like I'm, contributing something and making a good difference, or not. And when people really begin to have problems with this area, the common response I get in the research is, it's eroding my soul, and after a while I can't do this anymore. So any of these can be important. There can be multiple ones, but the more mismatches, the more the risk of burnout down the road. And the more things are in better shape in these 6 areas, the more likely you're going to have people more engaged with their work, the opposite of burnout. So the Maslach Burnout Inventory is the sort of standard measure now for over 40 years on measuring the 3 dimensions of that constitute burnout. But burnout is just the extreme negative one. There are other profiles that come out in terms of people's work experience, and they could move from one to the other or stay more in one. So I just want to make sure that people understand all of this. With burnout, we're talking about high frequency negative scores. I mean, we ask in the measure, how often does this happen that you feel this way? So they're saying most of the time, all the time, whereas other people, more low and not negative scores, are saying occasionally, maybe once a month, a few times a year. It's a very different kind of profile. So that's burnout. Disengaged, they're showing a high negative score on cynicism. They still feel they're good at their work, and they're not feeling particularly exhausted or stressed, but they really, really, really are checking out of the workplace. The overextended is a group that tends to be misinterpreted as burnout because they are high on the stress response of exhaustion. But they still love their job, and they still feel good about what they're doing. They're not burned out. They're tired. They're wiped out often, from this. But it's a different kind of experience. The ineffective profile is that they're not feeling the exhaustion. They're not negative about the job, but they're sort of wondering, am I in the right place? Maybe, they're not getting much positive feedback. They're not, part of a good community. And they're beginning just to have doubts about themselves. And this group tends to get understudied because people just focus on the stress of exhaustion and the cynicism and ignore it, unfortunately, which is weird because self-efficacy, we know, is an important part of the human condition. Finally, engagement. These are people who, it's not that they never say they're stressed or something, but it's the frequency is lower, and they're able to recover and do well. So in a sense, they're not showing high negative scores on any of these 3. So theoretically, it could be even more profiles, but these are the main 5 that we find in any workforce analysis. So I'm going to show you some data from one sample here. This is from physicians across North America. And this was done before the pandemic. So it's showing you, in a sense, what was more typical before then. And as you can see in the upper left, about 15% of those scored as burned out, all 3. But twice as many, 29, 30%, scored as the opposite, engaged. And that was certainly a very typical response in all kinds of organizations. People who were doing the Gallup engagement survey always kind of report that the needle is stuck at around 30%. And that's what we're seeing here. But it's not just burnout. It's not just the 2 opposites. There are these other 3 profiles. The disengaged, 20% in this sample. The overextended, and the ineffective. So there's a lot of different kinds of responses that can happen. And let me show you how those profiles match up with those 6 areas of work life, plus a 7th of administration. As you can see here, this is, again, healthcare. So these are healthcare workers, and they are being compared to the norm for healthcare workers. So the 0 baseline is the average, for this occupational group. And as you can see on the far left, the engaged group in general on all of those areas is looking better than average. compared to, other people doing the same work. On the far right, you see the opposite of burned out, and people who score as burned out, everything is going south on that. And it's not workload so much, it's the other kinds of things, the control, the reward, the values. Those are, the things that are really making a difference. If you look at overextended in the middle, again, this is the one that tends to be mischaracterized as burnout. Doesn't look like burnout in terms of the areas of work life. It's pretty much average, a little better, a little worse, but they've got one big issue, and that's workload. Seriously on workload. And they're tired all the time, they're exhausted. That is what constitutes that. But it doesn't look like burnout. The one that looks like it could be going towards burnout is the disengaged, the high cynicism people. The ones who are feeling, again, not a workload issue, no exhaustion, still feeling good about their work, but really checking out of the workplace and feeling badly about it. And then finally, the ineffective group is pretty much sort of average, all the way through, but not great, so it's not terrific, it's not bad, but, they could maybe use some other kind of interventions that more easily would push them towards greater engagement. Turning the burned out around, that's a much harder deal to do. So, the idea of matching people to the job. How do we get a better match between the worker and the workplace? Well, again, not new. This is something we do all the time. And basically, we do it by training people, by educating people, by running them through tests to make sure they're qualified and get, legal, kinds of degrees and things that allow them to then practice. They get practical experience, all of this kind of thing. So this is how we've got a job. How do we get people who can do it well? It's about matching. We also match when we try and help people cope. Again, the job is what it is, and now how do we help you become more resilient and stronger and healthier and, cope with the job, which is what it is. And one of the most popular ways of helping people cope is to tell them, don't work, go away, get away from it for a while. Which begs the question of what's going on with work, that one of the best things to do to cope with it is not to work. It says something about what's going on in the workplace, but this is what, as I said before, we do a lot of. The point to keep in mind here, although all of this helps people match to the job, it doesn't make the job less toxic, less stressful. It's not changing that. The job is what it is. You, the worker, are going to have to step up to the plate. You're going to have to fill the gap. You're the one who's going to have to change and meet where the job is. And this, I think, is one of the things that happened during the pandemic. Suddenly, people realized in a big way, in multiple ways, the job doesn't have to be what it is. We have to do the job differently. It can be different. It can be better. It could be worse. It could be, but it doesn't have, it is what it is? Not anymore. There must be some other things and other ways to do that. Things about the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffling or whatever. So I think a lot of people leaving certain industries to say, I can do something better. I just was speaking with an organization in Silicon Valley that had just posted a new job listing, and they were saying usually they are in such competition to find somebody. It's hard to get people. They were getting inundated with hundreds of applications. I said, where from? What kind of people? They were leaving healthcare. They were leaving teaching. They were leaving other kind of jobs and saying, I've got skills that I could use in this administrative position. So I think that lesson learned about the workplace can change. It can be different. We can find it, hopefully better is where we are right now we're not actually post-pandemic, but hopefully getting out of there. So to switch it around, let's match the job to people. Take into account their human characteristics and say, how do we make the job support them as best as possible so that they thrive? So how do we change work conditions that, create problems? And environmental psychology is what we draw on here. Again, this is not new. Ergonomics, human factors, which is focusing primarily on the relationship between workers and their physical environment. How do we redesign chairs so that people are not getting, musculoskeletal problems? How do we redesign workstations so we don't get carpal tunnel syndrome? How do we change and redesign cockpits and airlines so that the possibility of a mistake by hitting the wrong button or pulling the wrong lever won't happen? All of these kind of things are saying, how can we adjust the job to support the physical, cognitive body that human beings happen to have? And this is something where we want to say, let's apply that same design principle to the social, the psychological environment. What makes people tick? What motivates them? What inspires them? All of that kind of thing. Can we think about, again, a better match of the job to people to do that kind of work? And Chris Banks and I actually wrote an article about this and saying, there are at least 7 core psychological needs, social psychological needs, that are important. Autonomy, the amount of control and discretion you have. Belongingness, feeling you are a part of something larger in terms of the workplace and what you're doing. Feeling competent at what you are doing. And you probably recognize these ABC needs. They've been studied in many, many places. This is true not only in the workplace, but at home and the community. But we're talking here just about the workplace. But there's more. Psychological safety, not just physical safety from injury and, toxic fumes and so forth, but being able to feel safe in an environment where you can voice opposing opinions, where you're not going to be harassed, this kind of, or discriminated against. Fairness, again, turns out to be a huge need. People want to be treated fairly, in whatever the circumstance is. Meaning, another way of saying values, and finally positive emotions, which some people say, oh, that's not a need. But we're finding that people want to have good things happen at least some of the time in the place where they work or in where they're home or in the community. A chance to share a joke, a chance to celebrate something that was good, a chance to feel good about what you're doing and celebrate, other people and what they're accomplishing. So when we talk about match, the job between people and the job, we're often talking about what are the things that actually encourage and support these kinds of experiences, work experiences. So here's the burnout challenge. There are 6 paths to a healthy workplace. We take those 6 areas that I mentioned before and pivot towards how do we make it better there? How do we get to a healthier, better place? And here's some language around that. Sustainable workload. Doesn't mean you don't work hard, but there's a way to recover and keep going and doing it well. When we look at control, having some appropriate level of choice and discretion over how I'm doing the job. Getting some recognition and reward when you do something well. Having a work community that is supportive, that you feel you can turn to somebody if you need some help, that you'll be there in a reciprocal way to provide help to that other individual, that there's trust, that there's that mutual respect. Fairness, we're being treated fairly, we respect each other, we do things the right way, and that we have clear values and meaningful work that we really take pride in and really feel good about accomplishing. So how do we, do that? One of the things that I've been doing with colleagues for a number of years now is working with different organizations and companies and different workplaces around making those better matches between job and people. And there are 3 points that I just want to leave with you because I think they're helpful. The 3 C's. One is to collaborate, to get feedback, buy-in. The people who are going to try and make it better or engage in some changes need to be on the same page. Too much recently I've been seeing top-down only and not bottom-up feedback or sideways or whatever. We really need to kind of get to what are the pebbles in our shoe, the chronic job stressors that are not being well managed. How could we pick 1 or 2 of those and begin to make a more positive match or fit? Customize. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this research is that there is not one best practice that fits everybody. There is not one size of best practice that fits everybody. Whatever the principle is about how we could make this a little bit better in terms of how we maybe, run our monthly meetings, you have to adapt it to the local culture. You have to make it ours, make it work where we are, rather than just sort of implementing. I can't tell you how many times I have seen top down, usually, um, change programs or different things we're going to do that are done with the best of intentions and lousy implementation, and they will not work, and they don't. Final C, commit. It takes time. Things, any change, whatever it might be, how positive it's going to be, it always gets a little worse before it gets better because you're unwinding stuff, you're making mistakes, there are glitches that you have to course correct, but you need to sort of keep it going until you say we get to a better place and evaluate and modify it. So it turns out those 6 areas are not only a way to sort of see where are our major problems and risk factors, but it's also where we might start making better matches between people and the job. And it turns out that a lot of these, especially when you're focusing on these smaller pebbles, are small, inexpensive, customizable. And as I say here, we want a healthier job environment. We want workers to thrive. We want the organizations, companies to succeed. And a lot more detail and case studies and whatever of what I've just said is coming out in a new book later this year in November, The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Jobs by myself and Michael Leiter. So if you want more information about any of the points that I've been saying, there will be a book later on, and I hope that will be helpful. So thank you so much and for listening to all of this. And if there are some questions or issues, Chris, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Always a wonderful presentation and so timely. So we're just about out of time. We have about 5 minutes left. And if there are any questions, please put them in the Q&A. At this time, really, you have covered so many points that it's kind of hard to think of a question that you haven't covered somewhere in your presentation.
Right.
And what I think is so important about the whole topic of burnout is that, first of all, it's a real phenomenon, and it's misunderstood a lot of the time. And you've eliminated what burnout is as distinguished from exhaustion and other things that people have called as burnout. But you've also called out how incredibly dysfunctional burnout is. So we need to understand at what stage people are at along that continuum, and how to prevent getting further down the continuum towards burnout. And you've offered some great advice for that. And I also want to point out that in the whole day of speeches, presentations today, we have actually covered the spectrum of work, from people who can't find work because of unpredictable schedules and being told to go home when they're not needed, to gig work, which is work under one's own control, supposedly, but not really, and to office work, which is could be, professional type work. And we've also covered jobs in the service industry where, you are, in an essential worker in many cases. And it's just very tough to figure out how to make healthy work and healthy workplaces. And whether you have a place of work, your home, of the field, or whatever, we've got to think about what we can do to make it better. So I do have a question. And the question is, are you aware of any policies or programs applying these principles to low-wage workers or workers in precarious working conditions, such as gig work?
Yeah. Gig work, no, I don't. Although I have chatted informally with a number of gig workers to try and sort of get some of their sense of some of these things. I think that where more of the effort has been in a sort of a wide range of what I'll call human service, kinds of occupations. Actually, it's kind of interesting because a lot of the burnout work, when people would recommend, oh, you should talk to so and so over here, a lot of those occupations were what we now call first responders in the pandemic. So it could be as varied as people who are working in the police force, and people who were working in the emergency room of a hospital, and or a social worker or something like that. But over the years, people have argued that you can see these outside of those human service, kinds of places. And so I think that more research is being done, but not enough, and particularly on the low income, low wage kind of thing. I think we don't get enough access. We don't get enough sometimes trust to actually participate and talk about this. So there's a lot of challenges on that. But if you just look at all the people who were saying we're not going back, that's where they were coming from,
Well,
in a large degree.
I just think
looking for something better.
Clearly. It's a great question to be thinking about, and more investigation for sure. Thank you so much. It's just great to have you here. And so let me close this out for all of you since we're out of time, and we'll see you again tomorrow morning. We are going to start at 9 a.m. Like we did this morning, Pacific time, and we have a wonderful slate of speakers that are going to talk about emerging working conditions and different work arrangements and policy as a response. So please check in. We'll see you tomorrow.